Welcome to the University of Hawaii Art Gallery, Writing with Thread, Traditional Textiles of Southwest Chinese Minorities. I happened to meet the collector, Huang Yin Feng, for just a few minutes, and I asked him at that time if he would be interested in showing his collection in the United States, and because I was just overwhelmed by the quality of the few pieces that I saw. So he handed me a catalog and said yes, he would be interested. And so when I got back to Hawaii, I sent him a letter of thank you for the catalogs and some of our exhibition catalogs, and I never heard from him. And I never heard from him. But I wasn't willing to give up because I just had never seen anything of this quality anywhere in my travels around the world. And in having worked with clothing of Asia for another exhibition, I realized that the quality of these pieces that I had seen in Kaohsiung were so superb. One of my former students, Li Lun Dean, was from Taiwan, and she would often go back to Taiwan to visit her parents. And so each time she would go, I would tell her, you know, ahead of time, here's Franklin's, or that's what I call Huang Yin Feng, he goes by Franklin also. Say, here's Franklin's email address. Please make contact with him so that maybe you can meet him while you're between planes at the airport. Almost a year and a half later, he sent back an email saying, yes, I'll be willing to meet you at the airport. And so they met at the airport, and they just kind of clicked. And that was the beginning. Immediately, because of that kind of contact that they had, we made arrangements for Li Lun Dean, my wife and I, to go in March of 2005, and we spent 10 days there reviewing portions of the collection. The collection actually has over 10,000 pieces in it. Huang Yin Feng collected these over a period of 20 years and had made over 100 trips to Southwest China. But we looked at only about 1,000 that he felt were some of his best pieces in that trip in March of 2005. But he said we really needed to go travel into Southwest China with him in the summer if it was possible. We spent 3 weeks there, going into very remote areas, traveling into small Miao villages, and seeing how the people lived, seeing them doing their embroidery and weaving. And so that really laid the groundwork for this project. It's very important to have some sort of concept or idea in mind from the very onset. And in this project, one of the things, a theme that kept coming forward, that we kept resurfacing each time we were discussing it, was the fact that this clothing and the embroidery done in them very often tells the stories, the myths, the legends of the people that made these things. And it is their way of writing, their way of telling these stories. Most of these cultures that we were researching have oral traditions. They have no written language. In fact, of the 15 groups represented in this exhibition, as I remember, it's only one that has a written language of their own. The rest never had a written language. Their culture is based on the oral tradition. In cultures like this, we found that it was really the women who were writing the stories down. They were using the needles as their pen and the thread as their ink, and they were documenting this history, their stories in the embroidery that they do. So that is in essence the sort of key aspect of this project and this exhibition, was that it's a way of telling the identity of these people through their textiles. And that is why we came up with the title Writing with Thread, because it gives distinction and honor to the women who did the textiles and continue that tradition. But also the men do, and especially in the Miao culture, where there is such a concentration on silver jewelry, the men are the ones who do the jewelry, and they use the same motifs, the same symbolism that is present in the embroidery. So together they're documenting the culture and able to transmit it from one generation to the next, in addition to, of course, the continuation of the oral tradition. So this became the conceptual basis for the exhibition, showing how the different groups have maintained their identity, how when they come together with each other, how they interact and influence each other, how sometimes the stories of one group are assumed by another group. And so we have this kind of, this exhibition also shows that interaction, which is an important part of the culture there in Southwest China. This exhibition is actually, the research for it occurred in 6 provinces in Southwest China, 5 on the mainland and Hainan Island. And there are 15 ethnic groups represented, with at least 100 subgroups represented. Okay, a sub-theme of the construct of the exhibition, or the installation of this exhibition, is that we laid it out on 3 river systems: the Yangtze River, the Pearl River, and the Mekong River, and then of course Hainan Island. This is basically where the objects came from, where the strength of his collection is. In fact, he really has concentrated his collection on objects from Southwest China. The river system was a logical way of constructing the installation, because it allowed for us to show how these people migrated as they had to leave one area of China, because these were minority groups, and as the Han came in and settled in an area, the minority groups moved on, and so the river was an easy way of migrating to another area. Also, in planning the exhibition, it became a kind of nice, a good way of conceptualizing and formulating the construct for the installation, because the pathway that we take where people are walking through the exhibition is like the river, and the platforms along the side are this is the land area where the people have settled and built their villages. And so we're seeing the costumes, the outfits, on those areas of settlement along the rivers. In working on any exhibition, and especially one of the magnitude of this particular one, Writing with Dread, it involves a lot of people. We had actually 8 scholars working on this, 4 from China, 1 from Taiwan, who is the collector, Huang Yin Feng, and another from Canada, and 1 from Washington State, and 1 here from the University of Hawaii. So there's a lot of teamwork, a lot of people working together to make this happen. By having a lot of people working on a project, it provides a richness, a depth of scholarship, and the interaction between the scholars is a very important element in a project such as this. The most important thing, I think, is planning the space. That takes priority over the selection of color, because if you don't have good spatial planning, the objects aren't shown if they aren't shown the way they really should be, the exhibition doesn't work at all. I worked on the model actually in Taiwan, and when I had a question about something, I would ask the collection manager to get it out, and so that I could look at it again to confirm whether it would work in a specific place. And one of the things I always plan when I'm doing an exhibition, I really need to know, first is what I was talking about, is the concept. What is the theme, the concept, the ideas behind the exhibition? But then I personally need to know every object very, very thoroughly. And in this instance, I had to look at each object, see whether it was good on both the front and the back, or whether it could be shown, because obviously I couldn't show everything out in space. And also I feel that an exhibition should be something that kind of reveals itself as it moves along, that you don't walk into a space and just see everything in one view. It should have that element of surprise, that wow factor, that when you get to a certain point you go, oh my gosh, isn't that an incredible view? So I'm constantly thinking about sight lines, the viewer walking through, thinking about traffic control, what will happen on days like an opening reception when there's a lot of people in the gallery, when there are docent tours going through, so that the spaces can accommodate them. I'm also, in this installation, I was very aware of trying to provide some openings in the installation here and there so that you could see through to another section, but you couldn't actually walk through that space because there's a platform there. But it kind of gives you a hint of what's on ahead. So the entire installation needs to be this thing that kind of keeps revealing itself to the visitor so that they are enticed to move through it. One of the other things I feel is very important is to try to keep the installation as minimal as possible so that there are not distractions. I try to give priority to the works of art, in this instance the textiles and the costumes, and keep what is happening with the installation as simple and minimal as possible. One thing to do that is I try to eliminate any kind of distractions, and one way is to try to keep linear continuity running through the exhibition. For example, platforms will often line up with one another across a passageway where people walk, so that when you're standing off in a distance, you notice that things are not just haphazardly at different angles or meet at different points, but there is a continuity of line. Things like that are very important to lending a quietness to the installation so that it all seems to tie together, and therefore the visitor's concentration is left more on the objects themselves rather than on idiosyncrasies of the installation construction. One of the important things is when you're dealing with when I was planning this exhibition, is trying to realize whether especially the pieces that went on mannequins, was whether they needed to be seen from both the front and the back. And consequently, in developing the model, the maquette for the exhibition, I was very conscious of sort of building platforms out in certain areas that would allow the visitor to see the garment from the front, but also to be able to see it well from the back side. So that, this became a very, very important consideration in developing the installation. So throughout the exhibition, I have instances where you can see the mannequin well from the front, but then you can also see the spectacular backside of it. Now there are a few instances where the backside is rather plain, and I just felt it wasn't necessary to have that particular piece showing from both sides. But this is an important thing to consider in planning an exhibition, and this particular installation really tries to accommodate that. In terms of color, when I'm doing historical exhibitions or things that deal with a specific culture, I try to find a color that is appropriate to that culture. And in this instance, my travels through Southwest China revealed this sort of rich, deep, antique Chinese red that seemed prevalent in this area of China, and something that I felt was appropriate to this exhibition. The other thing is, when I'm doing an exhibition of textiles, or say photography, or any kind of object that requires light control of the light for conservation purposes, I generally go with a darker value, a darker tone on the walls. On a white background or a light-colored background, they would appear very dark. By making the background dark already, dark in tone, dark in value, they actually appear lighter. Also, it's a way of making it easier for people to actually see the objects because they don't have the glare, the brightness of a light background surrounding the object itself. I deliberately worked on selecting a color that is dark and that was of an intensity that was soft enough that it would work with these objects. Fortunately, the little color sample that I brought from China, we looked for fabric in Taiwan to use as a background for some objects. And when we placed it next to almost all the objects in Taiwan, when we were reviewing the exhibition or working on the exhibition in the summer of 2007, it just was absolutely a perfect color for them. The tones in the fabrics looked very good against this rich, deep red. Sometimes exhibit designers will change color. You know, they'll make the platforms one color, or they'll make the walls and the walls another color, or they'll change colors of walls throughout the exhibition. And that works fine in some instances, but I felt in this exhibition, because there were so many objects, and there was such a range of color in the objects, that I needed to keep that background, again, as simple as possible. So the platforms and the walls, in this instance, are all the same color. Lighting is another important aspect of putting an installation together. As I mentioned here, we needed to have a controlled lighting on the objects. These are fabric, many very old, and heat and light can be very damaging to objects such as textiles, photography, watercolors, works on paper. So we needed to keep the light level down to about 8, maximum say 12 foot candles. But generally we were hovering around 8 to 10 foot candles in this exhibition. And that is to preserve the textiles. So it becomes a real issue of when we're doing the lighting, how we're going to, using basically floodlights rather than spotlights, because spotlights would put too much light on an object, using low wattage, and if the wattage is too high already, or we're getting too much light on, we actually put just screens in. In our case, we simply cut circles of window screen, and we put layers of that in there till we get the light level down to what is acceptable for the objects. But it also creates, lighting can create, and it's the element that creates a lot of drama in the exhibition. With these dark walls of the installation, we have already a certain amount of drama, but it emphasizes, the lighting can emphasize the objects, but again, you have to do it within the controlled lighting that is necessary for these objects. But even then, what this does, it often puts the background area into even a darker tone so that the objects do appear lighter. I find that very often when I put an installation together, I use a lot less light than what I see in a lot of exhibitions when I travel. I don't think it's necessary to put in an excessive amount of light. What happens is, when the viewer comes in from outside, their eyes are such they come from an area where there's bright light, and so it takes them time when they walk into the gallery to adjust to this darker light level. But after they're in here a while, their eyes have adjusted, and so they feel very comfortable even in this more subdued light situation. But it does take time for them to adjust. And in fact, statistics show that the older you get, the longer it takes to make this adjustment. So generally what I do right at the entrance wall, especially if there's entrance graphics, signage, or the title wall, I will put a little more light on that and more light on the floor at the entrance, so that the adjustment when people walk from the bright outside to the inside is not as stark, is not as great. And that allows them to take a little time to make that initial adjustment to a darker environment, and then as they move on through, I have the amount of light in subsequent parts of the exhibition even dimmer, so that because they've already made that adjustment. When you have an exhibition of textiles, especially textiles that have been worn by real people, one of the important things is to try to show them on mannequins as they would be worn. One of the things about textiles, however, is that really textiles are made to be in motion. And unfortunately, in an exhibition, you can no longer do that. By putting them on mannequins, it gives us a better idea of how these objects of art were originally used. When I started planning this exhibition, I felt that a great number of the pieces would have to go on mannequins. And while we made our selection of what was going to be in the exhibition, and then had this incredible inventory of all the pieces, and I had indicated on that inventory which pieces would be on a mannequin. Subsequently, we could easily calculate how many mannequins we would need. And for this exhibition, I calculated that we would need somewhere around 54 mannequins. This, of course, presented a tremendous cost factor. And I checked into the price of mannequins, getting them here in the US, and it was going to be very pricey. Also, I was concerned about the fact that the mannequins that I would get here would be basically Western faces and also Western proportions. And I didn't feel that that was appropriate on an exhibition of Asian costumes. So I felt that it would be better if I would purchase mannequins in Taiwan when we would be there in the summer of 2007. To my surprise, when we went through the garment district of Taipei, I only found mannequins that were Western faces and Western proportions. And this presented a real problem because the proportions of the figures were often too tall and not correct. And so what this meant is that in many instances I had to actually buy different kinds of standard mannequins and put them together in strange and different ways. Sometimes I would actually have to cut probably 9, in one of them I had to cut out at least 9 inches out of the thigh and shorten the mannequin for it to be the right size for the garment. Because most of these people were much shorter than, and so we needed to have a mannequin that was appropriate. Fortunately, I had done an exhibition here in Hawaii in the 80s of Asian costumes, and I had a few mannequins made here in Hawaii to my specifications. And I took one of those heads with me to Taiwan just in case I didn't find something. And so when I didn't find anything appropriate in Taipei, we got a craftsman to fabricate at least 50 heads. And then we had to cover the heads with fabric, with a stretch knit fabric that matched the color that we had painted the mannequins. I chose a dark color, mainly because I didn't want the mannequins themselves, the heads, becoming dominant. I wanted the objects on the mannequins to show most readily, and the color that we chose, the fabrics that we were putting on them looked very rich against the dark color of the mannequin. I was concerned initially about, the fact that it was such a dark color and whether this was culturally sensitive and appropriate. And in my discussions with the collector and others in Taiwan, they felt that it was, that my concern about cultural sensitivity was fine, but that the dark color seemed appropriate. And these are sort of considerations that an exhibition designer has to take in mind, is what the reaction might be by the selection of a specific color and what that might imply and how people might interpret that. Another thing, I was very fortunate to find in Taipei a type of mannequin that had just a sort of padded arm with a wire inside that could be adjusted and moved. And since most of these, I didn't really want hands showing anyway, and because we could not, I just didn't want the distraction of the hands. And so by using this particular kind of mannequin, we can conceal the arms entirely and have the garment just be in the kind of position that we want it. Also, just in any kind, whether it's Western or Eastern or what, when you are showing clothing that has been used by real people, not the sort of idealized figure that we see in store windows, you always have to have mannequins made and custom made accordingly. So often we would take a mannequin and do padding with it in order to fill it out to fit the garments appropriately. So it became a real process of sort of customizing each mannequin for the specific piece of, or the specific garments that were to go on it. There are a lot of objects in here, like individual upper garments or jackets, shirts, that we don't have the skirt or the lower portion of the outfit. And so in those instances, we needed to display the thing sort of what I call kimono style, sort of stretched out. We don't have a lot of kimono stands here at the university, but I was also concerned that I didn't want a lot of stands coming up from the platform, so that the base would be very busy. And so, or the platform area would be very busy looking, with a lot of sticks and posts coming up. So what we actually did in this instance is we had, from previous exhibitions, a lot of acrylic tubes, and we used cut them to the width of the garment with the sleeves out, and then strung monofilament through it, and we were actually suspending the acrylic tubes with the garment over it from the ceiling. This kind of allows the garment to sort of float in space. It's kind of almost like a magic quality to it. And it eliminates the sort of busy quality down at the lower portions. Nevertheless, there are objects such as jewelry cases and other objects that need a base. For example, there are a lot of baby carriers in this exhibition, and they are mounted on boards, sometimes stitched to them, sometimes pinned to gator board panels. Then they are resting on posts that support this. These posts were done so that there was a kind of hollow rectangle that was made, and we have a plug in the bottom that we can screw onto the platform, and then we fit this column over it, and there is a matching sort of plug, wooden plug at the top that's attached to the panel, and this is how we keep the thing there. I didn't want these posts and those, and I should also say, those mannequins that didn't have shoes or leggings or pants but had skirts, to cut the cost of the exhibition, we also decided to not buy full mannequins for them. We only bought torsos, and we used tubes of cardboard that come from the inside of a roll of newsprint. And they again have a round plug at the bottom that is attached to, screwed onto the platform, and then a matching plug on the top. And so we can adjust the height fairly easy by just cutting off the cardboard too. We can adjust the height of the mannequin so that it is appropriate to the height of, say, the woman or the person that was wearing this costume originally. But it eliminated us having to figure out what we were going to do with the legs and feet of the mannequin by just presenting it on the post. Okay, this is a good example of the paper tubes that were used to support the mannequins without legs. Basically, this is our paper core, or cardboard paper core for newsprint. We get it from a printing company. We just have them save these, so there's no cost involved in this. And we make our, out of 2x4, we cut a round plug that is then, as I said, attached to the underside of the mannequin torso. We used this as the core or the base for what we call a hip stand, which is when we just have a skirt and we wanted to, and no upper garment, and we needed to show that sort of in the round. And so we fabricated a sort of, just cut a piece of plywood, covered it with ethafoam and the stretched knit fabric, and then we are able to sort of pin the skirt to that so that it appears as it would the sort of size of the woman's or the person's waist. Our bases for plexiglass cases are very similar in construction, where there's a kind of matching base at the platform level and at the top. This, however, we constructed a little larger base because the plexiglass case was large, and then we, in this instance, I had the students and Wayne Kawamoto, the gallery design assistant, fabricate stands to support the caps or the jewelry. And this was just, very specialized kind of detail work that needed to be done, again, to make them as sort of as minimal as possible, so that what you concentrate on, what the viewer concentrates on, is the hat or the pieces of jewelry, and not so much the stand that is supporting it. In all instances, I think I go back to this premise that you keep your background, you keep the support or whatever it is there for what you're displaying as minimal and as simple as possible, because you really don't want anything to distract from the objects themselves. You know, in a case like this with this very fragile hat that we wanted back out of the way so people would not be able to reach it and touch it. We wanted to mount it on the wall, and so Wayne constructed a beautiful sort of wire structure that then is supported or slots into the wall, so that you have this sort of just suspended in space there. And you really there's almost no angle that you see the support itself. I mean, you can see it a little bit here when you get right here, but we painted the rods that go into the wall the same color as the wall, so that it just kind of blends in and disappears. Again, maintaining simplicity in your environment is extremely important, and this is the way to give attention to what is really important in an installation. When it comes to displaying the jewelry, again, I want to make sure that the mount that's supporting it is as invisible as possible, so that really when the viewer is looking at it, they are hardly visible. Sometimes we actually had to use very fine monofilament, almost like a thread, to tie the pieces to it, to make it stay in place. But it just takes very, very detailed work, but also thinking and planning through that your base, or the support for whatever you're displaying, is not going to become a dominant aspect of the presentation. Interpretation that involves your signage and labels is a really important element of an exhibition. I mean, this is what communicates with people. They want to know about the objects. They want to know about the whole context of the exhibition. So, besides the title wall, which gives the title of the exhibition, in this particular exhibition, we decided that we would simply have the title on the inside, but we would have the title also on the outside, and then list also the different donors that help make this exhibition possible. But inside also, we have a sort of entry statement, not too long, because people don't like to read long labels or a lot of information. Statistics show that you get anything more than about 250 words, even on an intro sign, you're not going to get anyone reading it. So I usually try to keep it down to even I think this one here is about 125 words, which is still in my opinion, plenty. And a lot of people probably don't even bother to read that. But I try to keep, I try to think always as I'm working on developing the interpretive material for an exhibition, how I can say what needs to be said in the fewest possible number of words and still get the idea across. It takes concentration, it takes a lot of work to write so succinctly and still get that message or communicate the necessary message. Here in this exhibition we have really one block of entry signage with a secondary one around the back of the title wall. Next to that introductory text, there is a map that shows the region, highlighting those 6 provinces in southwest China from which these objects come from in the full context of the map of China, so that viewers get an idea of exactly where this is located in China. But also the exhibition labels are done in such a way that is for the individual objects. Most of the labels, in fact almost all of the labels, are on the platforms. And as a consequence, we had to be very careful because the platforms are only a foot from the floor, that the type would be large enough so that viewers wouldn't have to bend down and sort of try to view these things. So we experimented with type size, leading between the lines, the choice of typeface that would be easily readable, and we actually kept making it larger and larger. I did not want to have white labels on these dark platforms, and this presented a problem because they would have been very bright in value, and they would have been very distracting. So by having what Wayne did is he worked very hard working on the computer to match the color in inks of our paint color. A super job so that these labels sort of just blend in with the environment and they don't jump out. But it meant that the type would have to be in white on this dark color. Now that immediately is also a little harder to read. And so we also discussed, well, should we have it not a full white, but just, a tone. We eventually opted for the white because we kept looking at it and having people evaluate this, and we decided that the white was really actually easier to read. But white on a dark color is a little harder to read than black on a light background. The white on a dark background tends to get spidery and kind of vibrate. On those individual labels, there is a map that shows the county in that province is highlighted so that people can get an idea exactly where this outfit or this textile came from. And then we have the ID information that provides the information of what group of people and what area it came from, and then the date of the date of the object when it was made and used. And then we have an interpretive paragraph. They all needed to be able to fit onto one large label. Again, what is important is not making a sort of hard and fast rule that you say, well, I have to get this all edited down to just so it'll fit on one label of a certain size. I always feel that, if people realize that one or two labels are extensively long, it must be more important information, and so it will actually encourage them to read it. But if all of the labels were real long, they would probably not bother to read anything. So what I really try to do when I'm developing interpretive labels is to get variety in the length of those paragraphs or what I am writing about that, so that not everything is sort of a standard same length. This is a very good example of variety in individual labels, individual object labels. You can see here where we have, for the umbrella cover, there was a tremendous amount of information available on that, cultural information that was very important to understanding the object. And as hard as I tried to condense this down into so that it would fit on one label, I soon realized that was just going to do injustice for the umbrella cover itself. So I just accepted the fact that, okay, one or two labels can be longer. And I really feel that by having a long one, people will realize immediately that there must be important information here, because it is significantly larger than the others nearby, and so therefore they may be encouraged to read about that. But if you'll notice, there's also even variation in all three of these labels. The altar apron, where the paragraph only has 5 lines, but here we have quite a bit more for the Taoist priest robe. It is important that when you're developing the interpretation, that you just don't make all of your interpretive information the same size all the way through, because it's going to immediately send the signal to everyone that, you know, it's all the same. There's a lot of information, but by doing it with natural variation, it kind of encourages people to sort of, well, maybe I can read this one. It's not very long. You know, it's kind of like trying to psychologically entice people into reading these things. And quite frankly, not everyone is going, I mean, you have to accept the fact that most people probably are not going to read many of the labels anyway, but they will, when they see something that they're interested in, there should be interpretive information there for them to be able to read it. In planning the installation of an exhibition, I try to make sure that there is a kind of continuity of the way things are presented. In other words, that you don't sort of do one style of presentation in one area and another somewhere else. And this exhibition basically does that. I mean, it makes use of the mannequins throughout. It makes use of a certain way of presenting flat objects that is continuous throughout the exhibition. The same with the presentation of jewelry and hats in cases. So there is this continuity. But one of the things I usually try to do is, in the beginning, I usually try to start out with it being a little bit more quiet, not quite as busy. I also try to make it so that there are certain sections of the exhibition where, where there's this more busy interlude, where it's more active, and then it gradually quiets down in another area, so that it's just not all the same visual quality all the way through, so that it's sort of like what I imagine putting a symphony together or some musical production together, where it's not always at the same pitch all the way through, but it varies as you move through the exhibition. And here, as we come to the end of the exhibition, I felt it was very important to actually, and acceptable, to create a slightly more busy environment that would signal to the visitor that it is coming to the end. It is, that in a way it's like the whole, all the actors in the production are coming out for the finale. And so there's a lot more mannequins in this area. Partly it was demanded by the nature of the objects. We just had complete outfits for this section of the exhibition, which we didn't have for other sections. But it seemed appropriate to just kind of have more of them here to kind of, as I said, signal to the visitor that this is the end of the exhibition. In sort of closing, I really feel it's important to thank all of the people who were involved in putting this exhibition together, from the scholars to the people who just came and helped stitch objects or pin objects to the panels to help in the installation in any way. It takes a tremendous amount of work. When you consider that we started the installation in, I think, around the 24th of May, and this show opened on the 21st of September. It was months of working on this to bring it to this state, and it required different kinds of people at different times. People with certain abilities, we just had them involved all the way through it. So it really shows, I mean, one of the things about an exhibition, when it's well done and when it's as monumental as, say, this particular installation is, it's teamwork. It's everyone working together to make something like this happen. And I think people enjoy being involved in something of this nature. They all realized that doing something on a major scale and it rises above every one of us, and it makes it far more exciting. They're excited to be involved in it. So teamwork and being able to get everyone to work together is a really, really important aspect of planning and carrying out and making an exhibition such as Writing with Thread actually happen.